once your young tree or your cutting has grown, normally within 2 years of growth, and it's ready to be transplanted out into the field, you then got to consider what kind of considerations there are to enable it to survive most successfully within the site. The first consideration really is making sure that the plant species that you are going to transplant is suited to the conditions at that site and is going to thrive at that site without a huge input of resources from the producer. So you want to minimize the input of resources and instead be selecting species that are well adapted to the site, and then integrate them with other productive systems that are going to add fertility to the system in which you're growing that tree, and support the growth of that tree through that input of fertility, rather than you putting that input of fertility yourself. So once you've got a well adapted plant species that's suited to that site, the other consideration is, depending on the soil, you don't want to be digging too deeply in that soil, and the smaller the tree is, preferably from seed, before that it grows at that site. So if it's growing from seed, its root network will stretch down into the soil, and what you'll want to avoid is digging a bigger plant where you have to dig too big a hole, because what that is going to do is it's going to change the soil chemistry around the site where you've dug that hole, and it's going to be more dominated by the materials that you have inputted into that hole, rather than what the surrounding conditions are. So that's going to make it harder for that plant to grow out into that surrounding soil condition, which could be quite different to the conditions you've provided by amending it by lots of additions into the hole that you've dug. The other risk is that if it's a heavy clay type soil, if you dig a hole in that, the water is going to pool within that hole, because it's going to the water's going to fill out that hole, and it's going to be prevented from infiltrating into the clay layers. So a lot of fruit and nut tree species don't like sitting in water for prolonged periods of time, so creating a hole which will act as like a puddle of water will be a good way to kill that tree in the next heavy rainfall. So it's good to be able to put it on the surface, or to dig as small a hole as possible. And also all your amendments, so all the things that you add, so your compost, maybe manures, mulch layers, to put all of that on top of the soil and not put it into the hole that you dig. So to try to make sure that the conditions that the plant encounters within that hole are as close as possible to the conditions in the surrounding soil, so that it learns to grow into that soil rather than be constrained by the conditions that you provide within that particular hole. And then the surrounding soil ecology can break down those amendments, those mulches, those composts, those manures that you add to the surface of your planting, and it can draw it down into the whole soil layer and create a much more even soil layer around that plant, which is not going to create a problem spot where you planted it. Some other considerations are that you might want to support it with watering, particularly over its first summer. So you may want to establish a drip line where you've added your plantings. On a broad acre planting, this can be done with swales. So swales are a way of contouring a contoured landscape. So a landscape with a moderate slope between 15 and 30 degrees. You can contour that landscape by digging ditches and then creating a burn from the diggings from that. And then as water moves down that, it's going to fill out that ditch, and that ditch is on contour. So if you're looking down at the site and it's a kind of a hill site, you create those swales on contour, and you may do them every drop of say 2, 3 to maybe 10 meters. You may add enough extra swale, and it's on the berm of that swale where you plant your trees. And then what the swale acts is, it acts as a tree nursery, so that it holds the water and percolates that water slowly into the soil layer, and then extends the ability of whatever rainfall you have within that region to keep those young plantings of trees well watered and support their growth. And you can even add mulch to that layer, so that as the water fills that swale, and it will get colonised by soil ecology organisms, and they'll break down that mulch and slowly release those nutrients into the soil to support the young tree in its first few years of growth. So particularly in badly damaged landscapes, it acts as a way to manipulate the movement of water and nutrients within that landscape to support the growth of young trees. And in a flatter landscape where you've got more, where it's closer maybe to human habitation, and you can invest more resources into the growth of that trees, you may set up a drip line to irrigate it. You might even add nutrients to that drip line, and you can even as an alternative to mulch, lay down some black plastic to just make sure that all weeds are kept clear of that site, particularly for the first few years of the tree's growth, when it's most vulnerable to competition from invasive weeds of that surrounding area.